Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Baby and Them, where we talk about all things birthing and parenting beyond the binary. Today, we are so lucky to have Aurora Maoz here with us to share a little bit about her journey and parenting style. My name is Lauda. I accept they and she pronouns, and I'm going to let Aurora introduce herself before we jump into the chat. So, Aurora, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and how are you doing today?
Sure. My name is Aurora. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am 30 weeks pregnant, so I'm feeling pretty tired and big and hot today. Uh,
Congratulations.
Thank you. So I'm really excited to be here. I have a 4-year-old, and we've been doing gender creative parenting for the past 4 years, and plan to do that with our second as well, who's due in October. And so I'm really excited to be able to share my experience and connect with other people who are committed to a similar project.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. We're so grateful for your time and to share a little bit more about your parenting style, which is, the whole point of this series, to give visibility and exposure to different ways of parenting beyond the binary. And so before we jump in, can you tell us a little bit about your family structure? Who do you consider family? What does that look like for you? You already mentioned a few folks, but who is your community?
Yeah, so my immediate family is myself and my partner Drew. We've been together for a long time. And our 4-year-old. I also, I have some family in New York. I'm from New York originally. My mother died in 2014, so 4 years before my first child was born.
Well, may her
And
memory be a blessing.
thank you. Um, and so one of my aunts actually lives in New York, and she's sort of served as like a surrogate grandmother for my child, which has been really wonderful. And so, apart from that, my sister lives in New York with her family. And I have a lot of close friends, I guess, who I consider my family as well in New York. I think it's been hard with COVID, because we can't really rely on a lot of other people for care. So it's been a pretty immediate family structure for much of it. But yeah, I think those are the main players locally. My partner's parents live in DC, and so we were able to decamp and stay with them for a few months at the beginning of the pandemic, which we're really grateful for. So.
Nice. So it seems like you have a really good village and a little community that you've built for yourself, luckily with your family kind of built in. And so you mentioned in the beginning gender creative parenting, and I wanted to dive really into that soon and early in the conversation, because I'm sort of curious what that means for you. How would you define it? And did you always know that you wanted to parent in this way?
So for us, what it's meant is that we have made a conscious effort not to impose any expectations around our child's gender identity and expression. Um, and when I didn't always know that I wanted to do this kind of parenting. I think I always had a discomfort with the idea of gendering a person who could not speak for themselves. And so I didn't really know what to do with that. But when I was pregnant, there was actually a spot on Brian Lair that my partner heard about gender creative parenting. And he sent that to me, and I heard it, and I just felt like this huge relief, because there was like another way that we could do this, and that I could feel like ethically and sort of emotionally feel was right. I think a lot of it, sort of my discomfort around gendering children, came from my own family of origin, and sort of having expectations placed on my sexuality and when I, came out when I was 18. At the time, I was identifying as bisexual. I identify now as queer. I think that that was the term I knew then when I was 18 in 2001. Although I think it's too binary. Um, I didn't receive the level of acceptance and celebration that I think I should have had. And that sort of left a very deep impression on me in terms of the type of parent I wanted to be, which was to not only be tolerant of various forms of self-expression in terms of gender identity and sexuality, but also celebratory of that diversity, and to actually give my children the tools to understand sort of what the possibilities are in life. And so, in a practical sense, that means we've tried our hardest to use they them pronouns, and until our child could, tell us how they wanted to be referred to. Um, People in our lives were differently receptive to that. We still have some family members who cannot use the pronouns, which is, it's difficult. But it also means, we've always, as soon as our child was able to articulate kind of clothing they wanted to wear, we've always offered many different choices, and really just sort of tried to emphasize that they don't have to live as a gender that aligns with the sex they were assigned at birth if that's not what they want. And I will say that I have noticed, as compared to other children, that I do feel like our child has a level of freedom of expression that I I don't see in other kids as apparently. And so I take, comfort and joy and pride in that.
Mhm. That's beautiful. I really love how you talked about it being a celebration, right? As opposed to being tolerant, where some people kind of have this idea of like, it's so hard for me to accept your pronouns. I have to tolerate you. It should be more than that. It should be a celebration because all of these identities exist, and we should give children the freedom really to choose and to come into their own skin without that pressure. And I agree with you that I would have loved that growing up, and the world was not in a place. My parents did amazingly, but we're not in a place. And I just want that for my child also. So I really resonate with that. And you mentioned that it manifests in subtle ways, like, what clothing you want to wear today. How else did it kind of play up for you? And what kind of decisions did you have to make? You already talked about some challenges, but what were some unexpected things that came up around actually implementing this style?
I think I knew that, like, the transition to childcare would be hard. I think I didn't anticipate how foreign this idea would be to almost every single caregiver that we interacted with. Um, and so, we've kind of had to accept a level of flexibility around certain things, um, while understanding that what we say and do at home, I think, is like the major message that our child gets.
Exactly.
Um, and so I think I think when you interviewed Rosie, they talked about sort of uh, being open to all the pronouns because they didn't want to deal with various, just having to correct people and microaggressions and things like that. And when I heard that, it really did resonate with me because I often, you know, eh, because my child has not expressed a real direct preference at this point, we don't generally go around, correcting people. We and in part because I don't want our child to like witness a negative reaction and sort of like internalize that as like some sort of piece of shame.
Yeah.
And so I think, I I came into parenting with a very inflexible view about a lot of things. And I think I've had to adopt a level of flexibility to just sort of get by and um, accept that, doing our best is the best, is good enough.
Yeah, that's all you can do, right? And I agree with you. I think that people are naturally going to make mistakes, right? So there is a level of flexibility that just has to happen, right? Because there's never going to be this perfect communication and people follow through. There's still some teaching, there's still some unlearning that people have to go through. And we've had our own challenges as well. We've also had, community support us, and that's been really beautiful. But, our child being only 2 weeks old, we're now realizing how much work it is. And we're prepared for that because we believe in this. It's not really a choice, it's who we are as non-binary people. But it's a lot more work than I expected. And I'm ready for it. But one of the things I guess that has been coming up is this idea of intentionality, right? So it's not necessarily that people can't make mistakes. That's going to happen for sure, but it's the intention. And you kind of raise the issue of not wanting the child to have any shame or negative feelings around the parenting, right? Because ultimately it's to create a safe space for them, right? And so you talked a little bit about childcare. How has it been with schooling? So I'm imagining at 4, there's UPK or preschool happening. What decisions did you have to make around, schooling or talking to teachers? Has that come up yet for you?
In sort of preschool, first in a childcare setting, and then in preschool since 2, and we've been always, introduced that we prefer they them pronouns, and we would ask that the teachers use them, um, and I think we have seen just sort of varied levels of support and understanding for that. And there have been sort of some teachers who just can't seem to do it, um, which is hard, uh, but also because our child hasn't seemed sort of distressed by that, I've made the choice to not push with those teachers. I often check in with them about how they're feeling about things, to make sure. And so if there comes a time when our child says, I want this pronoun to be used, and that's not what's being used, we would, of course, advocate more strongly. But we're sort of allowing for that, some laxity among some of the teachers. Some people are more in the school setting are more interested in learning about this, and others seem to not have any interest or curiosity about it. I think what's more important to us is that our child will often go to school in um, clothing or a hairstyle that's not congruent with their assigned sex, and we've never had anybody ask us about that or made any comments. And I mean, obviously, if that were to happen, that's something that I would have an intervention about,
Yeah.
for sure. So in that respect, I think, I think we've kind of given a little bit on the pronouns, and tried to maintain like sort of the core values of what we're trying to do, as much as possible. It is kind of shocking, like how the childcare world just feels so behind. Um, we actually we had to take a trip to the pediatric ER on Saturday because of a fall outside the building, and there was a lot of gender confusion in the ER, and it was so odd to me that when all the questions at registration about like religion, like advanced directive for a 4-year-old, like organ donation when like we needed stitches, but nobody ever asked us about gender identity of our child or pronouns, and just like made an assumption, and then just were really heavy-handed about it. And I don't know why these things surprise me, but it just feels like interactions with children are just not keeping pace with the rest of the world.
Yeah,
So
I know it's wild because, I feel like in queer communities, we're so comfortable, and this is our reality with asking, with not assuming, and that's just how we are. And then it's really wild to enter into spaces where they seem so heteronormative and frankly transphobic that I shouldn't be shocked, but it blows me away because there's so much education and are advancing so fast, and the rest of the world just seems stuck, right? And again, that's why I think these resources are so important. But it really blows my mind. Um,
I
yeah.
think, I think one thing that gives me hope is that I feel like at least like elementary school children are like moving ahead, even if like the teachers aren't coming along. um I've just heard a lot of stories of kids in New York like feeling comfortable coming out younger and younger, and so uh that and as like in terms of sexuality, but also and in terms of like non-binary and trans identities. And so I guess that gives me a lot of hope. So
It gives me so much hope too, to hear about so many cases like Jazz Jennings, who communicated, so young and had parents who supported them. And just knowing that that's the reality, right? Kids can start communicating 3, 4, 5 years old, and just really listening to them, taking their lead, right? Because they're sort of the experts of their own genders, not us. We can't really assign that for them. And so we talked a lot about your child, but I'm sort of curious about you and how was your birthing experience? You identify yourself as a queer person, you're doing gender creative parenting, you already had one child, you're about to have another. What have you thought about, what before you gave birth, and what are you thinking about for this second child, maybe in the hospital, maybe like having a doula, the care and support around you?
yeah. So I think like one of the main things actually around like childbirth that had preoccupied me and preoccupies me still, has has a lot to do with sort of like a different aspect to my identity, which is I have a serious aversion to hospitals because I spent a lot of time in the hospital with my mother when she was dying. And so I knew, when I was pregnant the first time, was like pretty obsessive about like needing to give birth in like a non-hospital setting. Like I wanted to be in the birthing center. That was like extremely important for me. Um, and I did like hypnobirthing. I had a doula, and so I was fortunate to be able to sort of thread that needle to get to the birthing center before it closed in 2018 at Mount Sinai West, which I feel really fortunate about. It was um, just like such a tremendous gift to be able to give birth in that setting and not in a hospital setting. And I'm very sad that the birthing center is now closed. Um, I think we tried to explain to caregivers, we don't want anyone sort of announcing uh, what they would call the gender upon the birth. I honestly cannot remember what was said. Like I was so far like beyond anything at the time when I delivered our first child. And I think we also, my partner and I didn't have I think when it came to the birth certificate, whether we were going to put a sex on the birth certificate, because I think at that point New York had just started having another option. um I that was sort of like a challenging decision. I think we ended up uh assigning a sex on the birth certificate. I don't know if I think that was the right decision. I think we were concerned about, interfacing with higher level governments and being able to get documents and things like that. But yeah, now the birthing center is not an option. So I'm going to be delivering in a hospital, but I hope I won't be laboring there for very long. We have doulas this time around as well. I also, I'm right now, Drew and I are in such a relationship that we were able to conceive without any sort of medical intervention, and we have that privilege. So it was pretty pretty easy to conceive, although I did experience a pregnancy loss last October, which was pretty difficult. So
Sorry for your
um,
loss.
thank you. Um, I feel fortunate to live in New York, where I was able to get care for that. I think it's been a lot, as an attorney, all of the things that have happened in June are just a lot to stomach with Dobbs and everything. But
Yeah, it's a really wild time. Be a parent to be a human. It's a wild time.
yeah, so I'm hopeful that I can have another unmedicated uh, birth. I think I've worked through a lot of my sort of like, I don't want to like diagnose this as like a PTSD reaction, but in terms of like, I certainly had a lot of trauma around the idea of delivering in a hospital, and I feel like I've been able to sort of like work through that, and I think that I will be able to handle it this time, I hope. But I still do have a lot of fears about interventions and choices being made for me that I, don't get consulted on, and I think it's hard to feel like, and especially in New York, like I feel like birthing people are just made to feel pretty powerless in the hospital system. So that's why we'll have a doula and sort of know what things we need to advocate for, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you have a doula because I feel like a lot of the birthing experience is being prepared for what we call in this world the invisible questions, right? When you're being told you have to do this, you have to, or I'm just going to check you now, right? But you actually have a choice in a lot of these instances, and informed consent is so important. And so your doula can really advocate for you. It sounds like you have a good system there. And I'm glad that you're kind of like mentally preparing for that so you can have the best experience, because it does sound like you had some trauma, and that's real to be afraid, because giving birth is so scary in general. And then on top of that, with your experiences. Yeah. So I really am affirming a really smooth delivery for you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I had, it was pretty smooth up through delivery, and then my postpartum period was quite difficult. And so that's, when we were thinking about having another kid, I've had like a lot of struggles, like thinking about putting myself through what was pretty intense, like postpartum anxiety and depression and regrieving process. So that's been, I think that's really kind of my major fear, is sort of like what's going to happen to me after I deliver,
Yeah.
because my mental health really suffered last time. So
Thank you for
yeah.
being honest about that, because one thing that I realized, um, there's a lot of kind of like fantasy around giving birth of like how beautiful and romantic it is. But I actually don't really know anyone who hasn't had a birth journey that wasn't really difficult at some point or another, like either the delivery or post. And after going through it myself, now I'm realizing like, oh, this is really intense. Like I knew it was a really serious thing, but the actual experience is really intense and challenging, and your body goes through so many changes and things that you can't really be prepared for. So I appreciate you kind of just like naming it, because I think a lot of people are stigmatized or feel bad for acknowledging that they have a hard time at any point, but actually everyone kind of does. And so it's just better to be honest about it, right? So that you can actually be prepared, and so you can actually kind of give yourself the supports you need to work through it. So it seems like you're prepared this time. You got
I
everything.
don't I don't feel prepared, but yeah, I think, it's just hard to, I think I had, not having my mom to care for me after I delivered was really difficult. And, you know, we had a close relationship, despite the fact that she had limitations in terms of, um, some parts of me. I still um, would have given anything to have had her, there, to help care for me. So that was, uh, that's something that I know is, I'm going to have that feeling again, and is going to be very difficult to process. But I do think, I have more support systems set up this time to just know that that's coming, and that's going to be really difficult. So
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, and that's like such a big thing for everybody out there. Have your supports in place, have your hospital things in place, whether it's your essential oils, whatever it is, rose water mists, whatever makes you feel good. But definitely
yeah,
the post care is so important too.
we
Um,
packed so much stuff, and I don't know. We had to go and come back and go, and we brought the yoga ball twice. I never used it. Like, it's just like, um,
yeah.
but
I
so
know
yeah.
there's always these things that you don't use, but random things that you do that you didn't think you would. So I wonder, moving forward, what advice would you give to anyone who's sort of considering gender creative, gender free, non-binary parenting? What would be sort of your go-to tips?
Um, I think I would say, uh, be kind to yourself. It's daunting to think about taking on the task of, you know, educating and changing the minds of everyone you meet. Um, and I think it's good to give yourself permission to not always be doing that. Um, and I think, you know, my other piece of advice is, I don't know if this is a piece of advice or just a statement to say, you're not alone, and it's not, uh, I often am in this place where I feel like I'm the only one being rational, and I wonder what everyone else is thinking. Um, and I think it's good to trust your instincts if you feel that this is the right thing to do, because I believe that it is. Um, Their advice. I guess for me, I always appreciate hearing it's okay to set boundaries, and um, you know, we all just have to kind of do the best that we can.
Yeah, it's kind of like that quote, boundaries are the space at which I can love myself and you at the same time, right? And so a lot of times we were, raised, especially queer folks, to kind of fawn or to, get people to like us because we're the ones who are, weird or different, which we know is not true, right? But that's what's been placed on us. And I think if we are going to do this type of parenting, it requires actually having thick skin and not fawning and setting those boundaries and protecting your child and being very clear of what you expect from other people. And like you said, having flexibility and that's for yourself, right? Knowing that not everyone's always going to do great, but being confident to kind of set that boundary. So I love that you brought up boundaries. That's a big part of it for me.
Yeah, I think also, there you mentioned like thick skin. There is this sort of level of like, um, and I suppose like having this experience with my family of origin has like given me the strength in a lot of ways to just kind of be like, this is what we're doing. This is the right thing. if you don't agree, that's not my problem.
It's
So,
not.
um, whereas I think, there people with different experiences might feel more inclined to just sort of be like, oh, I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to upset other people.
Yeah,
And that's just not who I am. So.
yeah, same. It's wild. I was talking to my wife Ariella, who's gender nonconforming, and I was explaining to her how, I'm feeling this is difficult. Like we were checking in with each other, that we're standing 100% firm, but that it's difficult. And she's kind of, did a beautiful kind of check in or kind of call in for me. And she's kind of like, this is my life, because I'm gender nonconforming, people challenge me about how I dress or how I appear, what bathroom I'm using every single day. I don't get a say in that. Right. And so she's like, I know you've experienced this through me, right? Like secondhand discrimination through me and in your own right for being a person of color, etc. But you never really experienced this from the first hand. And now you are because you're going through your child. Right. And that made me kind of like center and think about so many communities for which this kind of feeling of difficulty is their everyday experience. And so the least that people in our lives could do is respect it, right? Because they're not the ones who are actually experiencing the discrimination. So it's the least they could do is try, right? So I remind myself of that too, right? That it's the bare minimum to just support us in this effort.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that.
Thanks. And so I guess I want to end on like a joyful note and ask you, what's your favorite thing about parenting?
um, I just really love like being, when my child is in a good mood, just sort of like laughing and playing with them. And I really like this phase around like 3, 4, even though, you hear about all teenager, like the tantrums and how difficult it is. But it's also an age where they really just have such personality and just like talking to my child and hearing them come up with stories and just laughing and I don't know, that's just like the best feeling in the world. So um yeah, I think those moments when I feel just like truly connected in a positive way
Yeah.
to my child are just it's priceless. I don't know how to describe that. So
Yeah, that sounds special because I feel so connected right now, and all the baby does is eat and sleep and poop. I can't even imagine when they can say anything back to me. I'm just gonna be crying with joy all the time.
I feel like I wasn't a great newborn mom. Like um I don't know. I think it's hard for me when they can't really communicate, and so it definitely got easier as our child grew, and um, just like it's becoming like a real like person. It's like
Yeah.
it's pretty it's pretty incredible to watch. So
Well, thank you for sharing and thank you for making the time to speak today. I'm really grateful for this conversation, for your honesty, for being so candid and sharing your experiences, because it will certainly, help other people on their journey to just know how other people are doing it. And we are all doing it in different ways. So I really respect your parenting, and I'm so grateful to have you as a shared, partner in this community of all of us parenting and trying to figure it out. Thank you for all that you're doing and in your work as well. You're just an all around badass. Can I even swear on this platform? Did it. But anyway, thank you for being the badass that you are. And so I guess I just wanted to close out by, if you wanted to share if people can find you, or, if you want to share like your Instagram, it might be private, or anything about your work. Just how would you close out?
um, yeah, I guess my Instagram is private, but if people want to contact me, then probably I can maybe I can put if you want to put my email up.
Yeah,
Um,
sure. I can do that. Sounds good. So I'll drop it down here.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't really get to this, we're pretty committed to sending our children to public schools that sort of reflect the racial demographics of our neighborhood. And so I'm active in the integrated schools, New York City chapter. So if that's anything you're interested in, you can also let me know.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much for that. And as a partner of a public high school teacher, I really appreciate that sentiment and effort. Well, thank you, Aurora. We're so grateful for you and sending the best to you and for this journey. You got this. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this and letting me share. And good luck with your baby. I hope it continues to be amazing and joyful, even though it's difficult.
We're getting there. It's more joy and love than anything. All the sleep deprived energy is worth it.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.